Good evening and welcome once again to another program of Issues in the News, where we discuss the important events that would have taken place in Guyana over the past week or so. And is the norm, there always are an abundance of issues to be discussed in our country. I want to begin by welcoming all of you who are joining us on television on the west coast of Berbice from Ahaika all the way to Ithaca. Welcome. Welcome also to those of you who are joining us in Region 6 on the east bank of the Berbice River, New Amsterdam, Kanji, and of course, all of you joining us on the Quarantine Coast on television. Welcome to another program of Issues in the News. And to those of you who are joining us on Freedom Radio from Rob Street, Georgetown, welcome to another program of Issues in the News. Last but not least, to all of you, the tens of thousands of you who are joining us on the Facebook platform right across Guyana, the Caribbean, North America, Europe, Asia, and as far as Australia. Welcome to another program of Issues in the News. And I see so many of you have joined us already. Ravi Narayan is watching. I see Nishad Sharma. I see Tilakdari Bikam. I see Neetu Maharaj. I see Tularam Muralidhar. I see Robert Rampasad. I see Roshan Singh. So many of you have already joined us. Good evening, says Narayan Singh. Sundar Sahadio from St. Martin. Sherry Rupchan. Good evening to all of you good people and welcome to another program of Issues in the News. And as I said, I want this program to be as interactive as possible. So please continue to comment, please continue to ask me questions so that I can answer them as quickly as I possibly can and as competently as I possibly can. So I have received a number of questions from the press that I will address in the course of my presentation. But I want to begin by by congratulating Teleperformance, a local an international voiceover company that has opened a second branch in Guyana at Middle and Thomas Street. They are located now, and at that location, they will be providing an additional 1,000 jobs for Guyanese living and working in Guyana. Teleperformance is a voice-over company. They have many, many international clients, especially in North America. So when persons make their calls in North America, many of those telephone calls to those large companies are answered and responded to in Guyana, and the second of those locations has been opened today by Teleperformance. I was in attendance, and so was His Excellency the President and our distinguished Minister of Trade and Tourism, the Honorable Onesh Waldron, were also there, and also in attendance were the managers and administrators of the company who traveled in from places such as Colombia, Nicaragua, and many other jurisdictions across South America, Latin America, and the Caribbean. This is one of the leading voiceover companies in the world, if not the leading one, and they have chosen Guyana to spread their wings and to spread their wings very liberally. In the remarks, the country manager and the CEO of the company expressed the view that they plan to expand their operations further in Guyana to the counties of Berbice and Essequibo, and they also identified Region 10 as a region to which they will also extend their operations. In addition to creating direct employment at these locations, they have begun a program whereby they are training persons to work at home, in particular women, single mothers, young persons, as well as old persons. The company said that Guyana is very fertile ground and the Guyanese people are very talented and educated, and they are it's easy to train them, and they have moved and transitioned smoothly into the voiceover business, a relatively new sector in Guyana. So congratulations to Teleperformance team for expanding their operations in Guyana and for opening a second grand and huge location where they will accommodate the headquarters of their operations in Guyana. His Excellency the President obviously was, as I said, was present and offered the featured remarks. And in those featured remarks, His Excellency outlined the government's plans and in particular the government's vision in the area of ICT, technology, and in particular with specific emphasis on data. And that's a major platform that the government is concentrating on as part of the developmental transformational agenda of Guyana. As you know, we have completely liberalized the sector. We have removed taxes from data. So data now is comparatively very cheap compared to what it was before we got into government. And we are working continuously to ensure that it becomes even cheaper. Also, the President outlined the infrastructure that we are creating both at the government level to create that environment that would make operationalizing data operations or operationalizing platforms within the ICT sector very conducive. He spoke about the different pieces of legislation that we are working on to protect data protection for medical records, data protection for personal information, data protection, a platform where data can be accessed, the country's data, persons' data can be accessed in a very ready way, because that is one of the modern platforms for development being pursued all across the globe. Guyana will not be left out. We are doing legislation that will allow for the accumulation, access, collection, and storage and transmission and use of personal data, medical records, and we are moving also to have transactions done and signature done by e-mechanisms, and that's part and parcel of our transitioning from manual-driven transaction into e-driven transaction at the level of the state and at the level of the public sector. That is where our country is going. That's one of the major platforms that we are pursuing, and the President in his address outlined the various initiatives that we are pursuing. He spoke at length about the card, the One Guyana, well, it's not a One Guyana card. I don't think we have agreed yet on the name, but it's a Guyana card that will be issued to every citizen. This card has the capability of accommodating over 2 million field of information. So we will populate this card with all the important information about the citizens. It will contain your ID card number, your NIS number, your tax identification number, your driver's license number, your passport number. It will have your credit information. It will have your medical record, and a whole host of information will be on this one card. And this single card is what you will use, every citizen will use to transact business right across the landscape of Guyana. It's a platform that we are building. It's very advanced in certain countries in the Middle East, in like Qatar, Dubai, etc. And we are entering into a contract with an international company that trades in the building and issuance of this technological platform, and this card will soon be available. for distribution right across the length and breadth of Guyana. And each Guyanese will be issued with such a card. We are also issuing a specific one to deal with non-Guyanese who are working and operating within the country. So at any given time, we will know where these people are, what type of transactions they're doing, and it also, all of these platforms are important for national security and most importantly, to measure trends and activities in our country so that we can formulate policies based upon these types of data that would be collected. This is a very, very advanced mechanism. I don't think that it is anywhere in the Caribbean, but I know that the Caribbean is moving in this direction. Guyana would be one of the countries leading this initiative in this hemisphere. So you will hear about that. We have to build a legislative platform, of course, to support the use of this card and to make it accepted at all public institutions and at private institutions as well. So these are the types of things that we are working on to integrate into our system, integrate into the public and private sector to ensure that we do business with greater alacrity, we eradicate the unnecessary and bureaucratic red tapes all over, and hence the importance of platforms such as the single window transaction, which is in the form of a legislation already laid in the Parliament and will be debated at the next sitting of the Parliament. That, again, is an unprecedented initiative in our country that allows for certain applications to be processed in a very expeditious way. It cuts out the applicant moving from agency to agency. For example, you want a building, you want to build a building in Georgetown, you go to one office and you submit all the relevant applications. You submit your plan, you submit your application for fire permission from the fire department, permission from the public health department, permission from central housing and planning, permission from I said public health. Wherever you need permission, you go to one central office, you drop those documents off, and that office is required and mandated to process all your documents. You are given a time frame to return to that window, for want of a better word. And at the end of the process, you ought to receive your approval or your rejection. Inherent in the law or in the system is a requirement that if your application spends more than a particular period of time at one desk, your application would be deemed to be granted. That is what the government is doing to make business easier in Guyana and to ensure that we remain competitive and we remain efficient in the public sector. And of course, we hope that that efficiency will transcend into the private sector as well. So I encourage you to listen to His Excellency's address at that forum. It was very important, I think. He mentioned a lot of important policies and programs which we are pursuing. The Attorney General Chambers, appearing for the National Data Management Authority, sued a Trinidadian company and obtained judgment sometime last week to the tune of over 6 million Guyana dollars. This claim relates to equipment that was purchased during the previous administration, and monies were advanced, but the equipment were not delivered. So we sued and we obtained judgment. The company initially appeared through attorneys at law, and then the attorneys at law withdrew their appearance. So default or ex parte judgment was granted against the company. Many persons have asked me, how is it that we will recover this judgment if the company has no assets in Guyana? Well, the law provides for judgments granted in one country to be registered and enforced in another country. In fact, soon we will pass a modern, what is called reciprocal enforcement and reciprocal enforcement judgment, reciprocal enforcement of foreign judgments bill in the National Assembly, where we are updating our current legislations. Let me get the name right. It is the enforcement, the reciprocal enforcement of foreign judgments. That is the legislation that allows judgments from one country to be enforced in another country. And once that company has assets in that country, then you recover the proceeds of your judgment in the same way as if the company had assets in the country in which the judgment was granted. Of course, our legislation in that regard is archaic, and as I said, we are taking a new, updated one to the Parliament. But currently, our law permits us to enforce this judgment in Trinidad, and that we will pursue that in due course. Another issue that the press has asked me to address is to comment on the insistence by certain businesses in Guyana on the use of US currency to transact business with that particular commercial entity. Let me repeat that. Apparently, there are businesses in Guyana, whatever services they are offering or whatever they are selling, they are insisting that the transactions be done only in US dollars. Ipso facto and prima facie, that is not permissible. Under the laws of Guyana, the Guyana dollar remains the valid legal tender for transactions being done in Guyana. However, the law permits that persons can trade, if they wish, in either Guyana dollars, or United States dollars, converted at a rate agreed upon by the parties. Normally, the parties will refer to a prevailing cambio rate at a bank, a commercial bank, or at a particular licensed cambio. So one can transact business either in Guyana dollar or its equivalent in US dollar. So that is permissible. What is not permissible, however, is the insistence on the exclusive use of a foreign currency to conduct a transaction in Guyana. It is indeed permissible, but one must get the approval, one must get the permission of the Minister of Finance to deal exclusively in foreign currency. To insist that transactions must be done exclusively in foreign currency without an approval from the Minister of Finance would be unlawful. So I thought that I will address that issue as it was put to me by the press. I have also been asked to comment on what relationship we have with the regional security system in respect of money laundering cases and, of course, the investigation and detection of organized crime. As you may be aware, In Guyana's last risk assessment report, the paucity of convictions has been flagged as an issue that Guyana must address in the area of AML CFT. And we have begun to do that. So you are seeing in the public domain an intensified investigative regime being pursued at the level of the Special Organized Crime Unit. That that will continue. We have joined on with the RSS late last year to enhance and augment our ability to detect and investigate organized crimes and money laundering offenses. This is an important regional body that works exclusively with governments in offering technical and other assistance in the area of AML CFT investigation. We not only signed on with this regional agency late last year, but when we were in the AML, the Caribbean Action Task Force conference in the Cayman Islands in November, December, we also became part of a body within the regional security system, a part of the executive body. The regional security system visited Guyana recently and engaged with various important stakeholder organizations. They engaged with SOCU and they have offered technical assistance whenever requested, and they also have said that they will offer attachment programs whereby SOCU officers can go to the agency, to the RSS, and do attachments with them to enhance their capacity and training. And they can operate within that organization for periodic intervals to see how that organization operates within the Caribbean. Of course, we will take advantage of that offer. Similarly, they met with the Attorney General Chambers and met with yours truly and have identified certain gaps in the Guyana's AML CFT legislative landscape. We have begun to work immediately in correcting those gaps. They have offered us recommendations, and we are working to implement those recommendations in the form of legislative amendments. That is work in progress, and soon amendments, two pieces of amendments will be taken to the National Assembly, both with the view of strengthening our AML CFT legislative architecture. So those were some of the issues that the press asked me to address, so I thought that I will speak to them and inform you as well in relation to where we are on those matters. I see the Public Accounts Committee has made some pronouncements in relation to procurement breaches that occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic while the APNU AFC coalition was in government. And I see Mr. Figuera is calling on amendments to be made to the law to permit emergency purchases in the event of a medical pandemic. Well, the breaches that were identified by the Auditor General really had nothing to do with deficiencies in the law. It had more to do with the government of the day failing to comply with the existing regime of statutory processes, and also the government's failure or inability or omission to enforce contracts that were flagrantly breached during the procurement period. And that led to a shortage, a chronic shortage of medication. It had nothing to do with the law being deficient or there being any gaps or weaknesses in the law. It's that the law was not complied with. The law is there and the law remains there. But if you don't obey the law, if you don't follow the law, you can't fault the law. One vividly remembers, even outside of the COVID period, the then Minister of Health, Miss Valda Lawrence, walking into the public hospital and directing that they purchase some $5.7 billion of drugs from a particular agency without any regard for the public procurement laws, which mandate a process to be embarked upon, a public procurement process, before there can be such expenditure. But that is not how they used to operate. This minister walked into the hospital and directed a hospital that is governed by a board. This is the Public Hospital Corporation. It's governed by a board. This minister walked into the hospital and directed the CEO of the hospital to disregard the entire procurement laws and to purchase from a single entity. And they did. And they bought the drugs at several times its market value. That had nothing to do with any weakness in the law. It was a complete ignoring of the law. Now, you can't blame the law for that. You have to blame the lawlessness of the minister for that. And that's the type of conduct that permeated their 5 year in government. And perhaps we don't speak about these things. Do you know, many of you may recall, that one night or one morning, President Granger was going with his security entourage. They were either going to Pearl or coming from Pearl, and they were involved in a serious motor vehicular accident that resulted in the death of several persons. You know, they left those matters unattended. They never attempted to even compensate those persons. This government is burdened. This government is burdened with settling those matters, and the compensation that the people are asking, running into millions. They left those people to die on the road and never met with the family, never offered them even their sympathies, more so compensation. The PPP government now is shouldered with the responsibility of defending lawsuits being filed against the state and forcing us to settle these matters because we can't find there is no evidence anymore. And this is the type of lawlessness that permeated the country for the past 45 years that they were in government, at every single level. As I said, perhaps we should speak more about these matters, but I will make all of that public very shortly, the type of cases that have been filed and why they have been filed. And now this government has to use taxpayer dollars to settle all these outstanding cases. So let me take a brief look at the phone to see what comments you are making, if you're making any comment at all. Yes, and the persons are all being represented by lawyers who are close to the PNC. I have no problem to say in saying that. They are all represented by one, and these lawyers were never suing when the APNU AFC was in government. They are suing now. I have been asked to comment about, despite amendments made to the Power of Attorney Act, there is still fraud being committed in relation to properties. And the case that is cited is someone who pretended to have some type of connection at Ministry of Housing and taking monies to get house lots for people. Now that has nothing to do with a power of attorney. That is simply a fraudster obtaining money under the pretense that he can secure a house lot for persons. I don't know whether he can, but he was apparently arrested and charged. And that tells me, without knowing more about the case, that the pretense of having this ability to be able to procure a house lot for whoever he promised to do so and from whom he received money, that pretense, in my view, apparently is a false one. Now, that's false pretense, that's a criminal offense. It doesn't require the use of a power of attorney, and it has nothing to do with the Power of Attorney Act. So we got to get these issues very clear when we are asking for clarifications on these matters. As far as I am aware, the mechanisms that we have put in place in relation to the Powers of Attorney Act are working. Now, it has made it significantly more difficult for a power of attorney to be executed. But that is what is preventing the fraud. Because the fraudster now can't easily present the power of attorney as they used to, and that was the platform that they used. They just go to an office, construct a document, forge everybody's signature, goes to a notary public whom they pay some money. The notary public don't ask for any ID, don't ask for anything, but just put their stamp on it. They take that instrument, they go to the deeds registry and register it. The deeds registry don't ask for any ID, they don't ask for any requirement. They register it, and once that document is registered, it becomes valid, and they use that as a weapon to commit crime. And that's the weapon that they use to commit fraud and to defraud people of their properties. Now there has been a significant decline in those reported cases or allegations since we have changed the law and strengthened the provisions of the law. Because now you require two forms of ID, and the two persons, both the grantor and the grantee of the power, or the donor and the donee of the power, they have to appear before a notary public, and they have to present their ID. And the notary public has to ensure that the ID is authentic. And the ID must have a pictorial representation of the person. So you can't give a document that doesn't have your ID and say that this is your ID. Your document is a picture ID is the requirement. And when they go to the registry, they say a similar regime of requirement is there. So it is now very difficult for them to perpetrate fraud. And that was the intent of the law. And we have no regrets at all in respect of changing that law and imposing a new regime of requirements. I agree. It is causing some people some inconveniences. But the greater good is what we have to look at. One or two personal inconveniences can't be compared with the public good of creating a safety mechanism and a safe infrastructure that will lend to the protection of people's properties. I prefer to inconvenience a few, but strengthen the legislative system for the country. The few who are inconvenienced, they themselves one day will realize the benefit of the mechanisms that have been imposed and inserted in the law. Because one day it will protect them themselves. Perhaps they're not seeing it right now because they are not the victims of these frauds. It's only when a person loses his property or is confronted with one of these fraudulent transactions that you really understand the magnitude of the fraud and the extent to which people go to defraud others of their property. In particular, persons who are residing out of Guyana, they are most of the times the victims of these frauds. And these interventions that we have made in the Power of Attorney Act and the Notary Public Act were intended to protect, in particular, the more vulnerable victims, which, as I said, invariably are the persons who reside overseas and are not here to transact their business. They trust people, and or people know that they're overseas, and they either abuse their trust and they use the power of attorney to perform acts that they were not really authorized to do, although the documents may say so, or they know that the persons are overseas and they use the occasion to commit the fraud, knowing full well that the persons are overseas and they may not be able to detect the fraud in time. By the time the fraud is detected, the property is gone. The property is sold to a third party. We can't have that happening in a modern democratic society. We have to protect the nation. And that's what those interventions were intended to do. And as I said, they are working. And we have no regret whatsoever. So, let me see. Someone is asking when will we be revamping the petroleum law? We are working on a new petroleum production bill. We have a Petroleum Exploration and Production Act that was enacted, I think, in 1988. Of course, that was when we were not a petroleum producer. We did not have oil and gas as a sector. And that act, obviously, by sheer passage of time, but more importantly, since we are now a major oil producer, that act obviously has become outmoded and cannot be a proper regulatory framework for the current sector. We have recognized that a long time ago, and we are working on a brand new bill that will take into account and will address the modern realities of Guyana as an oil and gas producer. So that is in the pipeline, and that will be made public shortly. And there are some other related legislation that we are working on in respect of the oil and gas sector. In due course, they will all be made public, but it takes time to craft these legislation. We have made a commitment that we will relook at the Local Content Act of 2021, and we will add regulations to it. We have now had 2 years of the act being in force. In my respectful view, as I said at the beginning, it was a good initial effort. It's the first piece of legislation of its type in the entire English-speaking Caribbean, and it's the first legislation of its type. We said that it would be subject to review as we gain more experience in the sector, and we will also supplement the law with regulations made by the minister. I think after we have acquired under our belt 2 years of experience as an oil and gas producer, operator, and exporter, and I believe now we are at a particular vintage point that we can now review our experience and start to work on modernizing or making adjustments to the local content law and bring in additional regulations that will strengthen the legislation to enable the government to achieve the core objective of the legislation, which is to protect Guyanese and Guyanese company in the oil and gas sector. That's the core objective. So yes, we will continue to review the matter, and we will ensure that we take on board the lessons that we have learned over the years in the sector and ensure that they are inserted in the law so that the law benefits from that experience. On Thursday, we will be celebrating, Thursday will be the 2nd of March, and we all know 3 years ago, on the 2nd of March, after a long struggle, we went to an elections. And as you all recognize, it was one of the most historic elections in the Western Hemisphere in modern times. And we must not forget the lessons that were learnt from those elections. We must not forget the struggles that were associated with ensuring that the votes cast at those elections were actually counted. We must not forget those who put our democracy on trial. We must not forget those who attempted in the most flagrant way to steal those elections, those who tried in the most vulgar way to prevent the true and real results of those elections from being declared. Many persons made huge sacrifices in ensuring that the sanctity of those elections were preserved, that Guyana's democratic credentials were protected and defended, and we must not forget the lessons that we learned and the experiences that we endured, the anguish and sufferings that we experienced during that period. As we reflect on March the 2nd, we must reflect on those matters, and we must pledge to do everything within our power to ensure that those things never happen again in our country. And we must also take the opportunity to salute all the foreign governments, the foreign observers, the foreign organizations, international organizations, governments, 100 governments across the globe that stood by Guyana, stood with Guyana and defended and fought to preserve and protect our democracy and the ballots of the people. Imagine where we would have been today if those miscreants were allowed to pervert the elections. We would have been a pariah state. We would have been blacklisted internationally. CARICOM would have expelled us. Commonwealth may have done the same thing. The United Nations. It's horrendous to think what would have happened in Guyana if those miscreants, those perpetrators, were allowed to pursue and execute their plans and their agendas. And they are still around, very much around, very much around. Some of them are in the courts, charged, and I know the public is impatient. People are asking every day. They want an update on the charges. I have requested the special prosecutor, well, I've requested the director of public prosecutions to request from the special prosecutor an update. And when that update is received by the DPP, I will make it public so that you will see where the charges are and why the charges have not been proceeding with the alacrity that you think they should proceed with. And you will make your views public and you will make your condemnations public. Because, and I will leave it there. I will leave it there. That report will be made public very shortly. I've asked the DPP to get it up and we'll make it public and you will see for yourself, because I can't answer over matters, I can't answer for matters over which I have no control. I can't direct how these cases are to be done. I can't direct how they are to be concluded or conducted. I can't do them. The system doesn't permit that. Different agencies are tasked with these responsibilities. And you, the public, are entitled to your views when you get the report that I'm referring to. So, March the 2nd, as I said, Thursday coming will mark 3 years for those very important elections and the lessons that were learnt therefrom. And we must reflect upon those things. I have been asked to go to speak on a television program dedicated to that, and I suppose many other ministers of the government and leaders of the People's Progressive Party, as well as important civil society organizations who played a role. I hope that they will be engaged also, because a people who forget their past are bound to repeat it. We can't forget our experiences. We have to learn from our experiences, especially since those who perpetrated or attempted to perpetrate those transgressions are very much with us and are very much on the political landscape. And imagine they are accusing us of rigging the elections. So barefaced are they that to this day they have not accepted yet that they have lost the elections. In some fanciful way, they're telling themselves, I don't know if it is insanity, I don't know if it's a psychological disorder, but they keep telling themselves that they won those elections. Yet, 3 years after, they can't produce their statements of poll. I don't know how you can win, but you don't have the paper to show that you can win. When we have the paper to show that we have won. Yet, they walk about this country and they tell people that they have won the elections and that we have rigged the elections. These people are crazy. crazy bunch of people, and they want you to put them in charge of this government and in charge of the state. I listened in utter disbelief to the opposition leader, Aubrey Norton, saying that he would have preferred for the country to have been blacklisted and destroyed rather than the PPP be returned to government. I heard him say that myself. He would have been preferred for the country to be destroyed than the PPP be given an opportunity to govern as elected by the people. A person of that mentality has no place in a modern democracy and has no place in a modern civilized society. Certainly, he has no place as a leader. Certainly, he has no place as a leader. And these persons say this emphatically. And where do they get this courage from? I don't know. But you have to be constantly and consistently vigilant, because all the gains that we would have made can disappear. Look how much progress we made from 1992 to 2015. And we became complacent. We became lackadaisical. We started listening to all types of propaganda. And we put another government in. And I don't mind. What did they do? What did they do to the country for 5 years? And then they showed their true colors during that 5 months period following the March 2nd elections. And I'm saying to you that all the evils that were on Guyana's doorstep, that put our country at the edge of that precipice, all those evils and evil persons are very much here. They are very much here, and they are very much in politics. And they are very likely to resume that type of conduct or to repeat that type of conduct come a next election. So, as we approach March the 2nd, let us not only celebrate elections and elections victory, because election victory didn't come, it came 5 months after. Then is when the new government was sworn in. Let us reflect on the seriousness of what transpired there, and let us reflect on the strong possibility, but not strong possibility, of the likelihood of a reoccurrence, and pledge that we will work fervently to ensure that that doesn't occur or reoccur in our country. Because, as I said, it's quite possible the people are still here. And they continue every day to demonstrate that they have not changed a bit. Every day they give you more and more evidence. They give you more and more reasons. They remind you more and more that they have not changed and they will not change. They rigged elections from 1968 to 1985. And then they spent 25 years in opposition. And you would have thought that they would have changed. They got one chance in 2015 after some 25 years in opposition, and everyone thought that they would have changed. And people gave them a chance. And the one chance you gave them, all the skullduggery, all the rigging tactics, all the fraud, all the duplicity, all the scampishness, all came back. All came back. Just like that, without any evidence whatsoever, they proclaim that they have won an election and they want to be declared the government. And up to now, 3 years after, they have not produced one statement of poll, not one. Not one. My friends, that is the reality of Guyana. Fortunately, you have a government who is working every day to ensure a better tomorrow for every single Guyanese. And that is your government's commitment. As we approach March the 2nd, I want you to be assured that your government is very much alive to those realities that we experienced, and we will work to ensure that the democratic credentials of this country are maintained and that we continue to work to deliver a better tomorrow for every single Guyanese. Every single Guyanese at every corner of this country. I want to thank you very much for spending the past hour with me. We have covered a range of important issues, and I want to wish you all the best. Good evening, and until I see you next week, take care and have a pleasant evening and rest of the week. Thank you very much.